Hey everybody! In today's video, we are going to do a fun mixed media project with this beautiful detailed bubble background stamp. I have a little strip that I used on an earlier card on the blog, and I just wanted to show you what that pattern looks like. And then I also have these message strips that I'm going to be using. So I'll start with kind of a fun smushed watercolor background using the liquid watercolors. I'm basically doing primaries here to get a good kind of overall sort of rainbow feel. And you can see my dandelion ink is almost gone because it's such a great mixing color for all the other colors that I use it quite a bit. So I'm going to mist both the paper and the watercolor itself just to get it moving and get it to really kind of cover that whole page. What you'll want to remember when you're using a very detailed stamp like this for this technique is that you will want the background actually to be on the darker side. So I'm adding the blue and more of that pink as a second layer over the yellow to sort of darken that up and give myself a little bit more contrast with such a delicate stamp. The other thing you need to remember is all watercolor dries much lighter than it looks when it's wet. And so you'll want to be as bold as you can with that color. Now, I got this fun textured little spot where that red is that's so detailed. You never know what's going to happen when you do these smushing techniques. You never kind of know what's going to pop out at you, but these little red spots look so cool on the finished background that I want to make sure that I preserve those. So you do want to really clean up your area when you're doing this technique before you go on to the next step, because it will transfer. So I'm going to blot some of the darker areas. If you ever have anything that overlaps and you don't like it, feel free to blot, but you can see that texture that I'm talking about there. It's amazing. So as I dry it, you'll see what I mean about how much lighter the color is getting as the paper is drying. So like I said, be bold. Always be very bold with your color. It will act a little bit differently than ink acts, but you can see how much fun that is. So now I am going to treat the paper with a embossing powder tool before I stamp on it. And that is because we are going to be embossing. And when you're using watercolor, it's really, really important that you treat the surface with a powder tool before you emboss. Because if you haven't dried your paper all the way, any residual moisture will grab onto that embossing powder and you will get little strays. And with a stamp this delicate and detailed, you don't want any stray embossing powder. So I'm using unicorn ink. This is a pigment ink, so it's perfect for embossing. And I'm using white detail embossing powder. And I'm going to just cover this up. Now you'll notice that the background stamp is just 6 by 6 and my paper is bigger. So I'm going to have some leftovers when I die cut this and do some other things that I'm going to do with it. But I'm not going to waste even one tiny little bit of this beautiful pattern because I just love how detailed these bubbles are and how crisp they are. When they're embossed, these have a very fine line on the open bubbles, and I just think it's such a fun pattern. This would be great if you were making an undersea card, if you had a mermaid, or if you had one of our many ocean-themed stamps. If you wanted to put this over kind of an amber background, it could also be like champagne bubbles. There are a lot of possibilities for this. I also think it would be fun to color in some of these overlapping bubbles, which I haven't tried yet, but it's what I thought about when I saw this stamp. So now I'm going to take these message strips. These are actually perfect for the width of paper that I chose, and I'm going to tape these down. Please note that Post-it tape does not really work once you've embossed something because that embossing is just slick enough that it doesn't have enough stick to it. And see what I mean about no waste? I used the pieces that were cut out, the negative space sort of that was left over, and I'm going to use that on a card. You'll see why. There's some great dies that are actually perfect to go with this technique that I'm doing with the little message strips. So the ones that were actually cut out, though, I'm going to do sort of like a modified Bargello technique and just make a little pattern. This is a fun technique that comes from quilting, and you can just kind of stagger similar shapes and layer them next to each other. You can look it up. I actually have a video on the Bargello technique using pattern paper. But here with a stamp like this, you can create your own pattern paper. Think how fun this texture and little strips of this texture would be in your art journal, for example. This is a perfect art journaling stamp. You can also do taco stamping just to get portions of this little bubble pattern into your art journal or onto your mixed media cards. So I think that if you like mixed media like I do, this is a perfect stamp for this. And look at all that detail in each one of those strips. It's so interesting. The colors are beautiful by themselves, but the colors plus the patterns really, really make this stand out. Now I have this leftover piece that just has the bubbles down the side, so I will be using that as well. And then of course this frame piece, which has the negative spaces that I cut into because I use those dies twice. And then I have two little strips that are left over that I can also use in an art journal. So here are the finished cards with this beautiful, beautiful stamp and a simple background. I hope you've enjoyed this. Head over to the blog for more information, and thanks so much for watching.